Welcome. Today we will be discussing why art and does it matter? Here with me today is Marcel Franciscono. He's an art historian. We also have Jerry Savage. He's an artist and an art educator. You can learn more about Jerry and his artwork by visiting his website at jerrysavageartist.com. Jerry, what do you think about why art and does it matter?
It has taught me to deal with unforeseen circumstances. It's allowed me to keep on my toes and adjust to change. And I've discovered all that in the act of painting. I think of myself as an average person who has a certain kind of talent, but the insights I've gained through art, I think it can apply to almost everyone in every phase of their art. And the aspect that struck me is that I was able to find what I consider reality in the subconscious, not in conscious intent. And to me, that was a complete surprise. So I feel that if art can reveal another kind of reality, and to me, the reality in my life is the subconscious. And it became a clearer and clearer as I progressed as an artist. So I think the information I've gained, which has given my life clarity, I think people can profit from that on a very personal level.
Does it matter?
Does art matter? Yes. To varying degrees. It would depend, I suppose, on the sensibility of the individual. But I think, in general, art in the sense of order, design, matters to everybody. I can't, of course, speak to what a practitioner feels about it. As Jerry just said, that's a different matter altogether.
Well, I know art matters to me. To me personally, I can't imagine my life without art. So I know, to me, it matters. It matters a great deal and has changed my life for the better. And I find that the art that I've collected that surrounds me, I swear it regenerates me. And I draw energy from it on a daily basis. And I consider myself very lucky to have found art that speaks to me and means so much to me as it does. And it's been part of my life my whole life. So,
John, what do you look for in art? Are you searching for something? What sustains you?
Well, one of the things I look for is a little bit of enigma. Means a lot to me. I have found, and again, I have art on my wall that I collected when I was 18 years old, and it's still meaningful to me now. And that means it came into my life without all the answers there for me at first glance. It changes as I change, and to me, that's one of the markers I look for, is not having everything spelled out for me. That shows up in your work, Jerry. Some of it behind us here. I mean, you don't, that's not to say that most people look for that same thing. I celebrate the enigma. I celebrate, that's one of the things that abstract expressionism can provide, is a lot of times there's no easy answers.
Well, you know, that's, from an art historical point of view, that's true of almost any art that one considers good or complex, that there is always something more to be said about it.
Right.
And our history has survived as far as it has survived on that basis, that there's always something more to be said about it.
Well, especially when it first shows up. A lot of
right.
great art, seminal works, in their time when they first appeared, a lot of cases were almost too much for the average person on the street.
Well, that's true of the modern era. I'm not so sure it's true of the past.
That's a good point, yeah.
Well, you know, the thing that always fascinated me and was a continual surprise is the fact that for a painting to work for me, I had to embrace contradiction. I had to use elements that on the surface you would think they would never work, it would never reveal anything. And it was always a struggle to have the courage to do that, because I was seeking order and continuity. And it takes more courage than people realize to embrace the unknown. In some ways, it's embracing chaos. And but I've had conversations with people at the Beckman about the concept of chaos, and they claim there's order in chaos. That if you look deep enough, you can see a pattern, you can see order. So I think in the subconscious, the information that you're dealing with is so layered and so deep that it's almost impossible to make sense of it immediately. My work has become simpler and more complex at the same time. It's a combination of opposites that I couldn't possibly anticipate when I first started out. When I first started out, I wanted control. I wanted order. I wanted clarity. But I discovered that that clarity was at the denial of who I was. And of course, I had no idea who I was. But also, I think that one thing that art, for me, as a collector, as an artist, is that it's a way of looking at time and seeking timelessness, seeing a purpose, seeing an order. And I think this is absolutely unique at this time period in our life, with YouTube, with Facebook, with photographs.
Well, you're describing a journey.
A journey, and something is so obvious, and I just thought about it just a few months ago, tattoos. What are tattoos? When I see someone heavily tattooed, I will go up to them and I said, what are these tattoos?
They're certainly part of our world now, aren't they?
They are indeed.
And invariably, each one will say is capturing memory, is seeking timelessness. So, you know, this must be part of our nature. This must be in our DNA, seeking timelessness through a work of art, through visual symbols. And when you ask these people about their tattoos, the story is heartbreaking.
I'm sure it's personal.
I mean, it's so intimate. You know, in the old days, Popeye would have mom on it. Mom, that's everything, the beginning of life. But it's a way of seeking timelessness. So since it's part of our DNA, I think it will always be important, always.
What do you think, Marcel?
Well,
about
it's very difficult
beauty?
to say. There's a great deal of contemporary art that has nothing to do with beauty whatsoever.
Right.
The spread of personal objects on the gallery floor, for example, or conceptual art.
Right.
There's nothing to do with that at all.
Right.
The great deal of beauty, however, in 20th century art, in much of it. You only have to think of Matisse, some of Picasso, Braque, Paul Klee. It goes on and on. And of course, Peter Bodner and Jerry Savage.
Well, I've always thought of beauty as being so subjective.
Certainly.
But the more I thought about it, and the more I realized that beauty is identified with youth.
I was reading an article recently that raised this question, whether beauty is subjective or not. And the answer that seems most plausible that comes through in this article is that it's a combination of subjectivity and the objectivity of the work itself. That it can't be completely subjective. Otherwise, there would be no criteria at all.
Well,
Right.
if it's about youth, there's a purpose to youth. You know, you're physically at the peak. You're most capable of continuing the species.
Well, but there is such a thing. I mean, it's been derided in more recent decades, but there was such a thing as a so-called old age style. Titian, for example, had it, which has nothing to do with youth, but does have to do with a certain kind of facility and simplification that comes, in the case of some, like Titian, comes with old age.
Well, I think that point of view is especially relevant in our time period, because the longevity that we're capable of in terms of advances in medicine and technology and information, that we're capable of living far longer than most people can possibly even imagine. And it seems to me that we spend our whole life seeking information and sources, trying to figure things out. But what's the point of it? Eventually, it'll have to, become wisdom, how to conduct your life, and that's the process I think you described with Titian and in Picasso and Mies van der Rohe and Frank Lloyd Wright. It's where information becomes wisdom, and that only happens in old age. A time period where you have perspective, you have a vision where these things absolutely matter. But the thing about beauty, it's the ideal form. It's almost impossible to sustain. You look at, the beauty of a young person, a man or a woman, a 17, 18-year-old boy or a girl, perfect stage of a life. But how long will that last? The ideal form? And look at how much we sort of worship that today with facelifts, makeup, costume, persona, all kinds of stuff.
Certainly in our society.
It's a dead end. It's an ideal which is destructive to pursue.
Right.
But I think Marcel's point is very well taken, that the well-lived life, the life of information seeking, of doing the best you can, doing good, is the best way of finding purpose in life. And the art is always context-driven. You're influenced by politics, by technology, about things that happen to you. It's a reflection. And if you look at a work of art carefully, you can see the influences, you can see the political dynamics of the time period. It talks about the culture, it talks about the response to it talks about influence. It has a history to it. I think it paints a more complete picture. But I think what Picasso was so interesting to me is he maintained his mojo. That's all he had was this sort of physical energy.
Yeah.
The fear of death.
But that physical energy, at the end of his life, or towards the end of his life, consisted largely in drawing from different periods of his own work in the past and trying to put them together in various combinations. And you can see that for me, you can see that too easily in his work. Yeah. And it loses the power that his work had earlier, for me at least. Yeah.
I think one of the greatest dangers for any artist is preconception, rather than let yourself discover.
It's very rare for a modern artist in the 20th century sense of modern to continue searching to the end of his life. Sure. I can think of two artists offhand who did do that. One is Paul Klee, the other one is Max Beckmann. One of the difficulties with the modern period, beginning really with Impressionism, perhaps even before then, is that in modernism, the artist essentially had to recreate the foundations of art, and that made it very difficult to sustain in old age, I think, for the most part.
Well, I think it may, but it's, you know, in a society where you are not given government support of the arts, you know, you have to make a living. And, but if you get funding from a government source, you know, you have to please your patron. And so you don't do art for the right reasons, but who knows what the right reasons are.
Well, but you forget, though, that in most of the history of the world, Western and Eastern, art was financed by the government. Well, if you call the government kings and emirs and whatnot, and the church.
And they were.
And they were, of course, of course.
And somehow individuality snuck in. So you got the unique vision with propaganda art, like El Greco, or like, you know, Caravaggio. But propaganda art is a lie that everyone knows is a lie. And I feel sorry for the artists that would sell their soul for such a small price.
Are you saying then that good art is not propaganda by definition?
I think so. I think so.
It has a different goal.
A different goal.
It's all in proportion. But you can see religious art that has those contradictory elements that reveal more than blatant propaganda art. But even lies reveal the truth. So
maybe. I won't go into that one.
In our modern world, what do we think about the role of public art today, with so much changing in our world, so much information around us everywhere?
Are you also including the design of architects?
I would say so.
You would?
Yeah, I would.
Well, then it's still important in that respect. Whether we still need to have, let's say, Calder's or Picasso set in public squares is another question.
That's a topic in and of itself, right there, certainly. Should our government fund the arts in today's world? That's a tough topic.
Well, you know, unless the intention is to abolish all public education, the government has funded the education of the artists in public schools and in public colleges.
Right.
And I, for one, could not have gotten an art education if I hadn't gone to a free college in New York. So yes, absolutely. As I say, unless the intention is to abolish all public education.
I hope not.
I mean, where does an artist begin to learn art if not in a public school?
Sure.
There are some private schools, sure, but not, you know, they don't begin to compare with the number of public schools.
I learned nothing about art in public school.
Well, but you're an exception, I think.
What I had encouragement, just encouragement. They would say, why don't you try this? Academically, I was a poor performer. I seem to be more concerned with a emotional kind of intelligence, that I was on another trajectory. But what I had in school was teachers who were magnificently encouraging. What I discovered with my work, I always had this mojo. You know, well, it's like I've been, someone has put a lighted match on the soles of my shoes. I'm always in motion of some kind. It seemed to be, you know, part of my DNA. But I am very subjective. And I know that's my flaw. Could be a flaw as a teacher. But I was very aware of that being a flaw. So as an administrator in the painting program, I knew how subjective criticism is. It comes from their point of view. And why shouldn't it? It should. That's what it is. People are very thoughtful. They have a history. They've studied these things in great detail. But it's just a point of view. So I made a point that have each painting class, advanced painting class, be taught by 4 different people who painted differently, to look at one work and come up with 4 different conclusions. And the objective was the students say, well, maybe my idea is pretty good. Maybe. But to me, it was always a learning experience. But I think human nature, if we judge by recent history, that things have gotten better consistently for many, many years, in spite of wars, in spite of everything else. There has to be some innate goodness. There must be some kind of natural law that reflects a higher order. There has to be. You wouldn't have the steady improvement in every aspect of our lives. So as an artist, I know it's subjective. It only pertains to my painting. I know when I'm conning myself. I know that. I can reach a point I have no choice. Maybe I have to make a dumbbell decision and see what happens. After all, in baseball, to be in the Hall of Fame, all you need is 3 hits out of 10. So you think about my
That's
painting.
one way to look at it.
Yeah, you know, maybe the paintings don't all hit the mark. Maybe they're compromises. That's all I knew, all I could do at the time. But it's worth a failure if I could spot as a failure. So to me, that in many respects, art does have meaning because it gives life meaning.
Well, to try.
To
reach
give it a shot.
beyond where you feel
Give it a
comfortable,
shot.
Yeah.
I think is probably one of the most important aspects of it.
I hope it's a life well spent.
Well, I think it is. I mean, I think the 3 of us certainly feel that the pursuit of art is one
yes.
that's a noble quest.
You know,
And think of how many bad things it prevents you from doing.
well, I think the conversations about these things are extremely important, and the fact that I've always been surprised to how much I've learned from Marcel. That we've been talking about the Bauhaus, and I always thought as the mortal enemy, and and then Marcel was able to make me see things.
Marcel's a good example of a man with many connections, and if you just listen.
Marcel, you started
out
out as maybe trying painting out.
Yeah, I did.
Well, what made you change gears?
Well, as I had told people, I talked a better painting than I painted.
And maybe some of the things we've discussed today will help you make your own conclusions about art and what it means to your life and what it might mean. So thank you for joining us.